immediate environs. In the just over 20 years that I've been here, I feel as though whilst we've seen the level of security in terms of armed police, the numbers of armed police, the extent to which they're armed and so on, increase exponentially probably, other aspects of the policing around the estate are less attentive than they used to be. And I think we both remember when sessional orders used to be moved at the beginning of every session, a kind of declaratory statement of a duty to make sure that members could come here and leave without being impeded. It may have had no legal force, but it did appear to give a different attitude and an expectation that members of Parliament coming and going was a very important part of keeping our democracy alive and healthy. And one also thinks of the situation for those members who drive into the estate regularly and leave in cars. Now there is a regular situation where people are queuing, members of the public very close to them on either side. It's predictable times very often when divisions might have taken place, and it's an obvious security threat, as it would be as well in Westminster Tube Station following predictable hours of voting.
Thanks very much. Shall I go to the other end of the table and ask Julie to respond?
Thank you, Chair. I would disagree with Graham slightly in that I don't think it is the same as it's always been. Yes, we've always had instances of, sadly MPs being murdered has happened before, MPs being attacked has happened before, but what we're experiencing now is a constant change in behaviour from a certain section of society. I entered the House of Commons in 2010, and from 2010 I've seen a dramatic change. I think the referenda have a lot to do with triggering this. My first experience of this kind of out-of-control behaviour was when I was campaigning in the Scottish independence referendum. But then when the EU referendum started, it went to a completely different scale. And I come from 35 years in politics, being a trade union official. I am not frightened of robust political debate or arguments being put. That is absolutely not where I'm coming from. But I think this is now a persistent, constant thing that we are having to deal with. I do think it's impacting women members far more than men. And it is, from my point of view, beyond acceptable. In terms of how resilient we are, I think members of Parliament are resilient people. The very nature of what we put ourselves forward to do, to go through selection rounds and get elected, you cannot be a shrinking violet. You have got to be fairly robust. So I don't think us as a group of individuals, I don't think we're not resilient people. But I think this is reaching a point, or reached a point probably some time ago, where it isn't acceptable what's going on. The vast majority of people that we meet in our constituencies in Parliament are very pleasant, very nice, even if you have totally different viewpoints. And I would like to stress that this is not all of society. This is a small group of people. And we are getting threatened. I think we should be treated the same as any other individual by the police and by security people. And I think a line has to be drawn. And I would describe it very much as what we accept as usual behaviour and what is beyond that line of usual behaviour. And I think once something crosses that line, it should be, clamped down on quite severely. As far as policing is concerned, I have to say my force in Northumbria, I cannot fault the way they've handled the threats that I've had, some of which have ended up in court and people have been found guilty. Some haven't for various reasons, but it is ongoing and it's constant. So I cannot fault the way my experience has been with Northumbria, and I know my colleagues from the North East have had the same experience. But speaking to colleagues from around the country, it varies entirely. It sometimes varies where you've built a relationship with an inspector or a superintendent or somebody, and then there's a change of personnel, and that can make a difference. So the response across the country is very variable. And I think that's one of the things where we do need an all-round approach moving forward to tackle this, because the response in Sunderland, where I represent, to Newport in Wales or Glasgow in Scotland or the home county should be exactly the same. We shouldn't have this variance in approach depending on which police area we have. The way we work, I can only say the way I work has completely changed in the last 2 or 3 years. I live 2 miles from where I was born, so I'm often from the area that I represent. I can't walk down the street and not know somebody, whether it's through the job I do or just I've gone to school with them or they've gone to school with my kids or whatever. And I think that's the other thing to say, that members of Parliament are people as well, and we have lives apart from being members of Parliament. I have staff, I have children, I have lots of grandchildren, and you're involved in all of their lives. And when you're doing that, of course you speak to people if they come up to you and want to talk to you as their MP, but usually there's that understanding, well, they want to say hello or they've got an issue and you tell them how to get in touch, but they respect that you're doing things with your grandkids. This is actually changing the way certainly I operate, and I know a lot of other MPs operate, in that, if we've got a particularly difficult situation going on, I won't wander down the beach with my grandkids because I won't expose them to that threat in case something happens. And moving on to social media, I think, social media in many ways has been fantastic. Facebook, Twitter, all of these platforms. But there is an element of people that are abusing this, and they are managing to try and disrupt what I think us doing our job. And a recent example, something was posted on, went into a public domain about some campaigning myself, other MPs were doing around the area with meeting points on. And some of the people who I have difficulty with decided to then try and organise protests around those places. So myself and other colleagues who were exposed in that way had to have the police there. They did a very, very quiet operation of being with us, around us, but in order for us to be able to do what any MP should be able to do, and that is go and talk to residents about problems they're experiencing. That's the job we do. And in terms of interfering with democracy, it absolutely is trying to interfere with democracy, because it is trying to stop us doing what we should be doing. On that day, they didn't actually turn up, but they had created a whole hoo-ha and a whole response that the police had to put in place in case they did turn up. Surgeries, most MPs I think used to do surgeries around the patch with open invitation, not knowing who was going to turn up. I don't do that anymore. I do as many surgeries, I see as many people, but they're all by appointment and they're all in my office, where we have levels of security and protection, not just for me, but for my staff who are coming to work and doing a job. And it's the same with wherever we go. We don't advertise what we do anymore. We advertise when we've done something. So they're not getting away with what they're trying to do, which is to try and disrupt what we do, but we're having to all the time be creative around what are the implications if we do this, how do we do it? And it just is never ending and getting worse and worse and worse from my point of view. It's not scaling down, it is scaling up. And I don't think anybody who is doing a job, and at the end of the day being an MP is a huge privilege and it's a huge honour, but it is a job. And when you're doing a job, you should be able to do that job in a safe environment. And that's where the balance between, yes, the rights of protesters, and I would always defend the right to protest. I've been on numerous marches and demonstrations over the years, but you do it peacefully. And the rights of MPs to get on with what we are paid to do and not be at risk by virtue of the job that we're doing.
Thanks. Vicky, can I come to you now?
So I chair the APPG for Women in Parliament, which is Women's Caucus. I also sit on the Women's and Equality Select Committee, where we've just done 2 inquiries into harassment, one in public places, one in the workplace. I also am on the Science and Technology Select Committee, where we've just finished our inquiry into the impact of social media on mental health. That's going to be published tomorrow. And I've also just taken part in what was called the Gender Sensitive Parliament Audit as part of the Better Parliament initiative. I want to look at 4 different reports that have come out recently that I think are interesting. One is the Interparliamentary Union report on sexual harassment and violence against women in parliaments across Europe. The other one is the review by the Committee on Standards in Public Life that came out on intimidation in public life in 2017. The Amnesty International report, which looked at qualitative and quantitative research on women's experience of women politicians in both the UK and the US. And it was women, not just politicians, but in public life. And the Fawcett report that looked at 2,300 local councillors took part in the research. So that's 13% of local government councillors across the UK took part in that research. The first thing I want to say is this is a real issue. This is different to what's happened before, and it's not just in the UK. If you look at the statistics from the IPU report that was published just at the end of last year, they looked at 123 women from 45 different countries. 81 of those women were members of Parliament. 85% of those women said that they'd suffered psychological violence in the course of their office. 46% had received death threats or threats of rape or beating. 58% had been the target of online sexist attacks on social networks. 67% had been a target of comments related to physical appearance. 25% had suffered sexual violence. That's 1 in 4 women, sexual violence. And 15% had suffered physical violence. Particularly challenging for women under the age of 40, and particularly challenging for women active in the fight against gender inequality or violence against women. The Amnesty report, which is called Toxic Twitter, particularly looked at how Twitter has become such a challenging place for female users. Many women no longer feel themselves able to express themselves freely on the platform. And it particularly targets out women and journalists and politicians. On the look by the Standards Committee, they said sort of what Graham said: intimidation in public life is nothing new, but the scale and intensity of intimidation is now shaping public lives in ways that are a serious issue. Social media companies have been too slow in taking action, political parties have failed to take leadership, and police authorities have shown inconsistency. And that was their report into 2017. And I think one of my concerns is that I think we felt at the time, back in 2017, that this was just a general election thing. And that once a general election had gone, it would sort of then, that was the peak of intensity. But I think we've seen that actually the intensity is still there and it's still continuing. My own experience, I remember back in 2014 in the European elections, before I went out campaigning every day, I put on Twitter, I put on social media where I was going to be in my morning session, my lunchtime session, my evening session. Meet me on the corner of X Street and Y Street, and good to see you. And people would come out and meet us. There's no way that one would do that today. No way one would do that today.
And do you think that that's a shame? Have we lost something with that?
I think, yes, it's a great shame, but it's not just a UK issue. So when we had the women MPs of the world meeting here 100 women from all over the world, and we did our breakout session. And what was really interesting is time and time again, women from all over the world were saying that the harassment and abuse that they get on social media has led to real threats, physical threats, that are then compromising their ability to get on with their jobs. Again, an example, I remember back in 2015 when I was leading the reforms of European gun law, receiving a social media post of the floor of the Bataclan Theatre and the message, "You're next." And at the time, we didn't really know how to report those threats. And then perhaps somebody said, "Oh, you should have reported it." But by the time you try and scroll back, it had been deleted. Obviously that sort of a threat is particularly scary because you know it's from someone who's got guns. You know, when you're getting threats from the gun lobby, it's particularly scary. I remember in the 2017 election, a partially sighted candidate who needs the assistance of a guide dog in order to go on canvass, so that partially sighted, she received death threats, rape threats on social media. So it's putting off the candidates as well as the elected politician. There's also the issue I've been subjected to micro-targeting of micro-targeted ads taken out against me, where specific ads have been put on Facebook just in my own area towards people who weren't known to be very firm levers, misrepresenting my position, and that resulted in threats into my inbox as well. So the technology is a real issue. It's not just a threat against the women, but it's ourselves, but it's actually, I believe, a threat against democracy, because it is stopping people, especially women, from putting themselves forward as candidates. The Fawcett study, which, as I said, interviewed 2,300 people, councillors, took part in that study, and they report that a number of women pointed to the constant abuse on social media as a key factor in preventing women from running for selection or election, especially when threats are directed against family members. And Amnesty International said a similar thing. Our research shows that there is a real danger that high levels of online abuse against women MPs will have a chilling effect on women taking part in public life